Hello math learners, check this out. Find the solution of the given equation x squared plus 7x plus 10 is equal to 0. Well, we have already discussed this kind of equation in our previous videos. So, this is a quadratic equation and we can solve this into 4 ways. However, since the quadratic term, the linear term, and the constant term are all available, let's try to use factoring. When we solve factoring, we make two quantities for this one, then we equate it to 0. We factor the quadratic term x squared, and that is x and x. Alright. Then, we factor our constant term such that the factors, when added, will result in the middle term, which is positive 7. So, what are the factors of 10? That is 10 and 1. However, if we add 10 and 1, that results to 11. But, if we use the factors 2 and 5, that will result to positive 7. So, we will use positive 2 and positive 5. Now, if we get this part, what we will do is we solve them separately. So, that is x plus 2 is equal to 0 and x plus 5 is equal to 0. So, what we will do here is very simple. We just transpose and we try to isolate our variable x. So, we transpose positive 2. It will give us 0 minus 2, which is negative 2. While in the other side, we have positive 5 or plus 5. We transpose that. That will become 0 minus 5, which will give us negative 5. So, these are the two values of our x. Easy, right? Now, let us consider this given problem. Give the quadratic equation with these solutions. Number 1, negative 5 and 1. Number 2, 2 and negative 4/5. Number 3, 4 square root of 3 and negative 4 square root of 3. And number 4, 7i and negative 7i. This is completely opposite to what we just did earlier. So, how do we do this? You want to find out? Stick around, I'll show you how. How are you doing, math learners? This is your free access math teacher Ash, and welcome to ML with Sir Ash. For today's lesson, we're going to discuss how to obtain the quadratic equation given its solutions, and we will know what is the relationship between the coefficients and the roots of a quadratic equation. So, this is a Mathematics 9 Most Essential Learning Competency-Based Lesson, Quarter 1, Week 2 to 3 of the curriculum. So, let's start. Let's first focus on negative 5 and positive 1. The value of the first x is negative 5 and the second is positive 1. How do we obtain the quadratic equation if these are the two solutions of that certain quadratic equation? Okay, there are two methods that I will be teaching you. The first one is what we call the reverse method. Okay, when we say reverse method, that is just the same as this one, what we did earlier, but we will going backwards. So from here, we go here, and then from here, we obtain from this one. Okay, so if you could study the step-by-step process, we started with the isolation of the x, and then we turn it back to its certain factor, and then we combine the factors, we use the FOIL method, and then given. Okay, so let's try to apply it here. So what we will do is we first transpose it to the other side. That will give us x plus 5 is equal to 0. Then this one, we will have x minus 1 is equal to 0. Okay, both are equal to 0. So now we can use them as our factors equated to 0. Okay, same as what we did here in the second step. Okay, now, after you get this one, what you will do is you just apply the FOIL method. The first terms, the outer terms, the inner terms, and the last terms. So we start with the first terms. That will give us x squared. We multiply them. Then the outer terms, x times negative 1, that is negative x. Then the inner terms, 5 times x, that is positive 5x. And finally, the last terms, positive 5 times negative 1, that is negative 5. So, As we can see in this given, this is a 4-term polynomial. So what we can do here is we can still simplify the middle terms. So we have x squared negative x plus positive 5x. That will give us positive 4x because negative 1 plus 5, that is positive 4. Minus 5 is equal to 0. So this is your quadratic equation in which negative 5 and negative 1 are your solutions. Easy, right? Okay. Now, let us try to consider the second example. Okay, math learners, we are here in our second example. We have x is equal to positive 2 and x is equal to negative 4/5. So, by using the reverse method, what we will do here is we transpose our positive 2, giving us x minus 2 is equal to 0. Now, here's the tricky part. What will you do if you have a value that is a fraction? Okay. First, you don't need to transpose it immediately. You need first to eliminate the denominator side. Now, in eliminating the denominator side, what you will do is you just multiply the whole equation by its denominator or the LCD of the whole equation. However, we only have one fraction, so our denominator is 5, so we multiply the whole equation by 5. Okay, 5 also here, giving us 5x is equal to 5 times negative 4, that is negative 20. Negative 20 divided by 5, that is negative 4. Easy, right? Okay. Next, we use the transpose. So 5x minus plus 4 is equal to 0. So here, we have x minus 2 is equal to 0. We have here 5x plus 4 is equal to 0. Both equations are equated by zeros. So we can now combine the two factors. Okay. So 5x plus 4 here is equal to 0. Then we apply the FOIL method. X times 5x, that gives us 5x squared. X times positive 4, that is positive 4x. Negative 2 times positive 5x, that will give us negative 10x. And finally, negative 2 times negative 2 times positive 4, we have negative 8 is equal to 0. Then we simplify the middle terms. We have 5x squared, 4 minus 10, that will give us negative 6x minus 8 is equal to 0. And that is your final answer. Simple, right? Okay. If you do have some confusions on how to solve this one, kindly rewind the step-by-step process in order for you to master it. Okay? Now, let us go to the third example. Okay, math learners, we have here two values or two solutions in which our solutions has a radical sign. So, how do we obtain our quadratic equation using the reverse method in this example? First, what you will do is you just do your simple reverse method. So, we have here x minus 4 square root of 3 is equal to 0, transposing it. And then here we have x plus 4 square root of 3 is equal to 0. And then what we will do is we have our factors combined together. So that is x minus 4 square root of 3 and x plus 4 square root of 3. Now, if you could still remember our topic in grade 8, this is an example of the difference of two squares. Okay, why is that? If you could still remember, these are both opposite, right? So, that's what we call conjugates. If we multiply this one, that gives us x squared. If you multiply this one, that will give us 4 square root of 3x. If you multiply this one, that gives us negative 4 square root of 3x. And if you multiply this one, that will give us negative 16 square root of 9. Because 4 times 4 is 16. Square root of 3 times square root of 3, that is square root of 9. Now, as you can see in the middle, these are both opposite. This is 4 square root of 3. This is negative 4 square root of 3. They can be cancelled out, giving us x squared minus 16 times, what is the square root of 9? That is 3. So, that is equal to 0. So, we have x squared minus 48 is equal to 0. And that is your final answer. So, technically, this is the example of the the dif so technically this is the example of the difference of two squares regardless in which 48 is not a square. However, this can be made through this kind of solution. Okay, so I hope this is clear to you, but don't worry because I will also teach you the second method of how to obtain quadratic equations. Okay, so this is just our reverse method. Okay, now let us go to the final example for the reverse method. 7i and negative 7i. Okay, math learners, we are now in our fourth example, which is the two values of our x are 7i and negative 7i. So how do we get the quadratic equation with this solution? Remember that I means imaginary number, and imaginary number technically, or I is technically square root of negative 1. Okay? So, let's try to solve this one. So, what we will do here is we transpose 7i, giving us x minus 7i equals 0, while the other one is x plus 7i is equal to 0. And then, we can combine the two factors. We have x plus 7i is equal to 0. So, this is just the same as earlier in the number 3. So, we can have x squared minus 49i squared. How did that happen? Just consider that the middle term will negate with each other. Okay? Is equal to 0. Now, remember that I squared, in mathematics, I squared is equal to negative 1. Okay? So, you just substitute I squared into negative 1, and that gives us x squared minus 49 times negative 1 is equal to 0, giving us x squared plus 49 is equal to 0, and that is your final answer. Easy, right? Okay. So now, let us try to consider, sir, do you have other solutions or other methods in solving or obtaining the quadratic equation? Yes. And that is what we call the second part of our discussion, which is the relationship between the coefficients and the roots of a quadratic equation. So here it is. Okay, math learners, we know that our quadratic equation has the standard form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. A, b, and c are what we call the coefficients of our given quadratic equation. So, the question is, if you are given the x1 and x2, which are the solutions of your quadratic equations, the first value of x and the second value of x, so that is x sub 1 and x sub 2. How will you obtain your quadratic equation if these are the given? First, let's talk about the relationship. If you add the first root to the second root, you will obtain the opposite of the middle term. That is negative b over a. Okay? Later, you will understand what this is. If you multiply the first root to the second root, you will obtain c over a. Now, this is our quadratic equation, right? A, b, and c. Where is the negative b over a or the c over a there? If this equation is divided by a, so if you divide a and a, this will be cancelled out. B over a, that is somewhat the same here but opposite with the sign. And c over here, and c over a here is this one. Okay, so let us try some examples. Remember, the sum is the opposite of the middle term, and the product is the constant term itself. Okay. Okay, let's consider first our example number 1. The first value of our x is negative 5, while the second value is positive 1. So, in this method, what you will do is you get the sum of the two roots. So, we have negative 5 plus 1, and that will give us negative 4. After you get the sum, you will get the product of the roots. Okay. Now, in multiplying negative 5 and positive 1, we have a final answer of negative 5. Okay, so now, let us construct our quadratic equation. So we have ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Now remember that if the sum and product are integers, meaning it's either a positive or a negative, and it's not a fraction, then we can say that our a is positive 1. So we just write directly x squared. Okay, then our sum, which is our middle term, opposite of our middle term, that is negative 4. So what is the opposite of negative 4? That is positive 4. So we use positive 4, then copy the x. And finally, for our c is our product. So c here is negative 5, then we just copy negative 5 is equal to 0. And that is your final answer for the quadratic equation in which the two solutions are negative 5 and positive 1. Remember, it is opposite, while here in the product, they are the same. Easy, right? Okay, now let us consider example number 2. Okay, for our next example is x is equal to positive 2, and the other one is negative 4 over 5. The sum of that is 2 plus negative 4 over 5. We will use the LCD, and since this is a whole number, so we can use immediately our 5 as the denominator or the LCD of the two equations. So 5 times 2, that is 10. Then since they are just the same, you just copy this one. So that will give you positive 6 over 5. Now let's go to the product. 2 times negative 4 over 5. That will give us negative 8 over 5. Now let's make our equation. X squared. This one is our b. So that is the opposite. So negative 6 over 5x. Then this one is our c. So that is negative 8 over 5 is equal to 0. Now, as you can see, this is not yet the final answer because our coefficients has a rational number or has a fraction as its coefficient. Let's try to use whole numbers as our coefficient. So how do we make all our coefficients to be whole number? You just multiply the whole equation by its denominator, and that is 5. So if you multiply 5 here, that will give us 5x squared. If you multiply 5 here, 5 times negative 6, that is negative 30 divided by 5, that will give you negative 6x. If you multiply 5 times negative 8, that is negative 40 divided by 5, that is still negative 8 is equal to 0. And that is your final answer, and that is just the same as our second example and the reverse method. Simple, right? Okay. Now let us go to the third example. Okay, math learners, we are now here to our third example, which is x is equal to 4 square root of 3 and negative 4 square root of 3. We will use the sum and product in order to obtain the quadratic equation of this solution. Okay, so first is we add the two solutions rather. So, remember this, math learners, that if you are adding two numbers that are opposite with each other, the result will always be 0. Okay, next is we multiply 4 square root of 3 times negative 4 square root of 3. That is 4 times negative 4, that will give us negative 16. Square root of 3 times square root of 3, that is square root of 9. However, this can be simplified. That will give us negative 16 times 3. And if we multiply negative 16 and 3, we will have negative 48 as our product. Now, since our sum here is 0, then what you will do is you don't need to write any middle term. Okay, you just consider the final term or the constant term. So, that is negative 48. So, that is your final answer. And if you could still remember our given example earlier, the answer for our third example in the reverse method is just the same as our answer here using the sum and product. Okay, and now let us go to the final example. And now, math learners, we are down to our final example, that is 7i and negative 7i. First is we add them. 7i plus negative 7i. Remember, the answer for two opposite numbers added together is always 0. Then we go to the product. So 7i times, or you can use this one, negative 7i. That will give us negative 49i squared. Remember that I squared is equal to negative 1. So if you multiply that one, that will give us positive, sorry, let's not just write positive here. Okay, positive 49. Okay, so you have now your sum, you have now your product. So if you make your quadratic equation, the middle term is 0, so no need to write that one. Our constant term is positive 49. So the answer here is x squared plus 49 is equal to 0. So, I hope you have learned what we have discussed for this session, math learners. Remember that in obtaining quadratic equation given its solution, you have two choices to consider. You can use the reverse method, or you can use the relationship between the coefficient and the roots by the use of the sum and product. Now, this is the time that I will be challenging whether you have learned our lesson for this session. And here it is. Okay, math learners, thank you very much for listening and having a good time learning about mathematics in our new session for today. This is still your free access math teacher, Ash. And always remember, it's fun to learn mathematics if we are together learning. Thank you, keep safe, and God bless. Math learners, if you like this video, click that like and the subscribe button if you are committed of learning mathematics in the easy way.